Hello everyone, and welcome to a new course. I'm here, and this is a course where we'll be looking at some of the secrets of Renaissance art, both religious and mythological subjects. We will be exploring how artists painted these incredible works of art with all their details, atmospheric perspective, rich colors, and dramatic lighting. And we'll also try and understand the inspiration behind the artist's choices, the meaning in their paintings, and the symbolism they used. In this first lesson, we will look at two paintings, both based on the same story from the Bible, but painted by two different artists. They are both called the Adoration of the Magi, or the Three Kings, but are painted by Italian Renaissance artists, one by Gentile da Fabriano, born in 1370 and died 1426, and the other by Botticelli, born in 1445 and died in 1510. I have chosen these two paintings because, although they're both called the same name and depict the same biblical event, there are quite a few differences between them. These differences show us the evolution of painting during the Renaissance period. We'll begin by drawing our own interpretation of the paintings. Then we'll move on to analyzing the details of the artwork. If you wish to follow along and draw the paintings yourself, I recommend that you use my sketch. You can download it from the website below. So let's get started with the drawings. When drawing the figures, focus on the way the body twists and bends, and remember to add these counter angles to help the poses feel more natural. Once you've got the general shapes of your drawing, you can then fill out the rest of the drawing with more detail. Again, when drawing the faces, pay attention to the S-curve of the lips and the direction of the light. Also, if possible, try to copy down the original artworks in black and white. This exercise will really help to train your eye to see the values and shapes in the artwork. Now let's take a closer look at the paintings and see what we can learn from them. Firstly, we can see the difference in scale between the two paintings. Gentile's Adoration of the Magi is much larger than Botticelli's. In fact, the Adoration of the Magi was one of the largest paintings ever made, measuring 381 centimeters tall and 248 centimeters wide. It was commissioned for the Church of Santa Trinita in Florence, which is a huge church. Therefore, the painting had to be big enough to cover the altar wall. The subject of the Adoration of the Magi comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. It tells the story of the three kings who traveled from the east, following a star until it stopped over the place where Jesus was born. The star told them that they had found the King of the Jews, and so they went into the house and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Looking at the two paintings, the first thing that catches your eye is the difference in composition between the two artworks. Gentile's painting is divided into three sections, whereas Botticelli's painting feels much more unified and harmonious. In Gentile's painting, the left section shows Joseph with baby Jesus and Mary looking at the three kings on their way to see them. In the middle compartment, we see the adoration. The kings are presenting their gifts, while angels announce the arrival of the kings to the shepherds in the distance. In the right-hand compartment, we see the journey of the kings. They are traveling through a mountainous landscape towards Bethlehem. Botticelli's adoration of the Magi has no such divisions. Instead, he focuses on the adoration with the three kings presenting their gifts to the Virgin Mary, who is seated with the Christ child on her lap. Behind them stands Joseph, and in the background we see the city of Jerusalem. Moving on to the next point of comparison, let's talk about the color. The Adoration of the Magi by Gentile da Fabriano is full of brilliant colors. The main compartment dominates with its blue, red, and gold, whilst the other two compartments balance out the painting with green and brown. There is a lot going on in this painting, and the colors help to direct our eyes around the painting, telling us where to look. The cool colors on the left and right draw our eyes to the main focal point, the center. In contrast, Botticelli's painting is much more muted and harmonious. He uses a limited palette of colors, and the whole painting is bathed in a warm glow. Let's now take a closer look at the details in the paintings. Firstly, look at the buildings. In Gentile's painting, the architecture looks flat and decorative. The buildings don't serve any real purpose other than to provide decoration for the painting. In Botticelli's painting, however, we see a great difference. The architect structure is more developed and serves a real function in the painting. The buildings frame the central figures and lead our eyes to the focal point. Next, let's take a look at the landscape. In Gentile's painting, the landscape is highly detailed and almost photorealistic. The rolling hills and mountains fill up the space and seem to go on forever. There is a clear distinction between the sky and the land, and the landscape seems to be an end in itself. In Botticelli's painting, however, the landscape is much simpler. There are no rolling hills or distant mountains. Instead, there is a simple hill framing the city of Jerusalem in the background. Moving on to the figures, both paintings show the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child on her lap. In Gentile's painting, Mary is seated on a throne, and the Christ child is being held out to receive the gifts of the kings. In Botticelli's painting, she is seated on the ground in a more humble pose, and the Christ child is wrapped in swaddling clothes. As for the kings, both paintings show three kings, but they are very different. In Gentile's painting, each king is unique and has his own distinct features. They are richly dressed in fine garments and wear elaborate crowns. In Botticelli's painting, the kings are much more alike and are less individualized. Their clothing and crowns are much simpler too. Another point of interest is the light. In Gentiles' painting, there is a clear distinction between light and dark. The figures and buildings cast long shadows, and the landscape is clearly lit. In Botticelli's painting, however, the light is much softer and more diffused. There are no harsh shadows, and the figures seem to glow from within. Finally, let's take a look at the symbolism. Both paintings have a number of symbolic objects, but again, there are some key differences. In Gentiles' painting, there are a number of small details that are not immediately obvious. For example, the red spot on the wall behind Mary symbolizes the blood that Christ will shed on the cross. The staff of the man on the far left resembles a capital letter T, pointing to the cross. The building behind the kneeling king on the right also resembles a capital letter T, again pointing to the cross. All of these small details point to the future suffering of Christ. In Botticelli's painting, there is much less overt symbolism. However, there is still a number of interesting details. For example, the red and gold on Mary's dress symbolize her royal bloodline. The blue drapery wrapped around her knees symbolizes the sky. The orange tree behind her symbolizes the rising sun and the light of Christ. The banner held by one of the kings reads Iris Unis, which is Latin for "Behold the miracle." The inscription reminds the viewer that they are looking at a miraculous event. When studying art, I like to use a mind map to organize my thoughts. Mind maps help me to link ideas together and see the bigger picture. So here's my mind map for this lesson. In conclusion, we can say that Gentile da Fabriano and Sandro Botticelli both painted the Adoration of the Magi. However, their paintings are very different. Gentiles' painting is larger and more detailed. It is also more complex and has more action going on. It is full of bright, vibrant colors, and the figures are richly dressed. On the other hand, Botticelli's painting is smaller and more harmonious. It has a more unified composition, and the colors are more muted. Both paintings are masterpieces of the Renaissance, and I hope you enjoyed learning about them. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at another masterpiece of the Renaissance. So make sure to join me then. And as always, keep creating.